For 20 years, no one touched the well behind Ashford Plantation. It stood beneath a dying oak tree, wrapped in hanging moss and silence. The stones were cracked. The wooden cover was sealed shut with rusted iron, spikes driven deep into the frame like something meant to stay buried. The older townsfolk remembered the summer it was closed. The Whitmore family had lived in a small house near the cotton fields. Quiet people, rarely seen in town. One humid night in 1893, neighbors heard shouting drift across the plantation. It lasted only minutes. By morning, the Whitmore house was empty. No packed bags, no wagon tracks, no signs of struggle. Only one thing had changed. Fresh mud surrounded the well. Sheriff Dalton questioned everyone. Thomas Ashford's father claimed the well had gone dry weeks before and was sealed for safety. Without bodies, without proof, the case dissolved into rumor. But children were warned. Workers avoided that side of the land. And every year on the same July evening, Thomas Ashford would walk alone to the oak tree and stand in silence, staring at the sealed wood. Some said he was grieving. Others said he was listening. Time passed. Crops rotated. Generations shifted, but the well remained. Then the drought came. The summer of 1913 cracked the earth open. Streams vanished. Livestock weakened. Every working well on the plantation slowly failed, except the sealed one beneath the oak. Workers refused to open it. They said the land had chosen which water to give. Thomas Ashford, now older and quieter than his father ever was, walked to the oak one breathless afternoon carrying a crowbar. A small crowd gathered at a distance. Sheriff Dalton, gray-haired and slower now, watched carefully. "You don't know what you'll find," the sheriff muttered. Thomas didn't answer. The first iron spike screamed as it was pulled free. The second resisted. The third came loose with a sharp metallic crack that echoed across the fields. When the wooden cover finally lifted, a breath of air rose from the darkness below. Cold. Not the coolness of water, but the kind that feels untouched by sunlight for decades. Thomas leaned forward and peered into the well. At first he saw only shadow. Then far below, a faint reflection. Water. Still, unmoving, and floating gently at the surface. Something pale. Something small. Thomas ordered a rope. The first bucket descended slowly into the dark. When it returned, it did not carry water. It carried a child's shoe, still tied, still clean, and stitched faintly inside the leather was the name Whitmore. The crowd stepped back as if the small shoe might move on its own. No one spoke at first. Thomas Ashford held it carefully, turning it over in his hands. The leather was not rotted. The stitching had not faded. It looked as though it had been placed in the well yesterday. But 20 years had passed. Sheriff Dalton cleared his throat. "Lower it again." The rope creaked as the bucket descended for a second time. This time it came back heavier. Not water, not mud, a tin lunch pail. Its metal surface was polished clean, untouched by rust. Inside were folded scraps of cloth and a small wooden whistle carved into the shape of a bird. Someone in the crowd whispered, "That belonged to Samuel Whitmore." Thomas's jaw tightened. Again the bucket went down, and again it returned with something preserved beyond reason. Buttons, a child's hair ribbon, a pocket watch that ticked faintly when shaken. Ticked. After 20 years underwater, a murmur spread through the workers. Fear had shifted into something worse. Recognition. Sheriff Dalton stepped forward. Enough. But Thomas wasn't looking at the objects anymore. He was staring into the well. The surface of the water had changed. It wasn't still. It was circling slowly, as though something far below had just turned. A wind rose across the plantation, though the trees remained strangely unmoving, and that's when Thomas heard it. A sound rising from the depths. Not a splash. Not a groan of stone. A breath. Long. Measured. Followed by another. The sheriff heard it too. His face drained of color. The workers began stepping back one by one. Thomas did not, because beneath the second breath, there was a whisper, a child's voice. Soft. "Father." The rope trembled violently in Thomas's hands. Suddenly, the bucket jerked downward as if pulled. Sheriff Dalton grabbed the rope to help. But the force from below was steady and deliberate, not frantic, not wild. Intentional. The rope went slack. Thomas stared into the darkness. The water was no longer reflecting sunlight. It had turned black. And for the first time in 20 years, something inside the well was looking back. Stories like this are not just legends whispered across fields. They are fragments of forgotten history, buried beneath silence. Welcome to History of Fear, where we uncover the mysteries that time tried to seal away. And this one was never meant to be opened. Thomas didn't move. Even as the rope slipped from his hands and coiled at his feet, he kept staring into the well. The black surface below had gone completely still again. Too still. Sheriff Dalton grabbed Thomas by the shoulder. "Step back." But before Thomas could respond, the rope snapped tight. Violently, it lashed upward, cutting the air with a sharp crack. The workers screamed and scattered. The bucket exploded out of the well as if hurled by unseen hands. It slammed against the stone edge and spilled its contents across the ground. Mud, water, and bones. Small bones. Perfectly arranged. Not scattered. Not broken. Placed. Two tiny arms crossed over a ribcage no larger than a dinner plate. A skull rested above them, tilted slightly to the side as if listening. The crowd froze. Someone began praying under their breath. Thomas stepped forward slowly, his boots sinking into the wet soil. He knelt. There was no decay, no rot. The bones were pale, clean, almost polished, as though they had never been buried. Sheriff Dalton's voice trembled. "That's impossible." But Thomas wasn't listening, because the skull was turning. Not fully, just slightly. A scraping sound echoed across the plantation yard. Bone against stone. The wind stopped completely. Even the birds had gone silent. Then, the whistle. That same small wooden whistle from the lunch pail. It began to blow on its own. One long, hollow note. The workers broke. They ran. Some tripped over tools. Others abandoned wagons mid-load. Within seconds, only Thomas and the sheriff remained. The whistle stopped. The skull stopped moving. Silence fell like a heavy blanket. Sheriff Dalton reached for his revolver, hands shaking. "This ends now." He stepped toward the well. The ground beneath him cracked. A thin fracture split across the earth, running from the well outward like a vein. Water began seeping from the crack. Dark water. Cold. Thomas felt it soak through his boots. And then, the whisper came again. Closer this time. Not from the well. From behind him. "Father, you left me." Thomas turned slowly. Standing at the far edge of the plantation yard was a small figure. Barefoot, clothes soaked, head tilted unnaturally to one side. Its eyes were open. But there were no pupils. Just endless black. Sheriff Dalton fired. The gunshot echoed across the fields. But the figure didn't fall. It didn't move. It simply smiled and began walking forward. Slow, measured. Each step leaving wet footprints that did not fade. The rope was gone. Not snapped, not frayed. Gone. As if it had never been tied to the bucket at all. Thomas staggered back from the well, staring at his empty hands. Sheriff Dalton swore under his breath and ordered 2 men to fetch another rope. But before they could move, the well echoed. Not loudly, not violently, just a single hollow knock. From inside, every worker froze. Another knock followed. Slow, deliberate. Thomas felt his chest tighten. He leaned forward despite the sheriff's warning. "Samuel?" he whispered before he could stop himself. Silence. Then, a faint scratching sound, like fingernails against stone. Sheriff Dalton grabbed Thomas by the arm. "Step away." But Thomas pulled free. "I heard him." The air grew heavy, thick enough to taste. The sun above seemed dimmer, though no clouds had passed. One of the workers suddenly pointed downward. "Look!" The water level was rising. Not flooding, not spilling. Just climbing the stone walls inch by inch, defying gravity as it moved upward instead of overflowing. And inside the dark surface, shapes, small, pale, moving beneath the black water. Thomas's breathing became uneven. He remembered the night Samuel disappeared. The argument. The threat. The moment he told the boy to stop asking. Questions about the workers who had vanished before him. Sheriff Dalton's voice shook. "This isn't possible." But the well didn't care about possibility. The water reached the rim, stopped, perfectly still. Then from the center, a small hand emerged, not decayed, not skeletal, smooth skin, unmarked, resting gently on the stone edge. Thomas couldn't move. The hand tightened its grip, and another hand rose beside it. Two small hands now holding the rim of the well. Sheriff Dalton stepped back. Workers began running, but Thomas stood rooted in place as a face slowly surfaced between the hands. Not waterlogged, not broken. Samuel. Exactly as he had been 20 years ago. Wide eyes, unblinking. But something was wrong. His lips didn't move, yet the voice came clearly. You closed it. Thomas's knees buckled. Samuel's gaze shifted past him, toward the plantation house, toward the fields, toward the men who had once laughed when the well was sealed. The water trembled again, and behind Samuel, more faces began to rise. 1, 2, 5, all children, all silent, all watching. This wasn't just about one boy. The well had not forgotten, and it had finally decided to return what it was given, all of it. No one ran far, because the screaming started almost instantly. The first worker collapsed near the cotton fields. He wasn't pulled. He wasn't attacked. He simply froze mid-step, then slowly turned toward the well, as if something had called his name. One by one, others stopped running. Their faces went pale, eyes wide, focused on something only they could see. Sheriff Dalton shouted orders, but even his voice sounded distant, now like it was being swallowed by the air itself. Thomas couldn't breathe. Samuel was still half emerged from the well, water unnaturally still around him. The other children remained behind him, floating just beneath the surface. You buried us, the voice echoed again. Not from Samuel's mouth, from everywhere. The ground beneath Thomas vibrated faintly. The plantation house windows shattered outward at the same time. Every single one. Glass raining down like silent judgment. The workers who had stopped running began to whisper. No, I didn't mean to. It wasn't my idea. One man clawed at his own throat as if something invisible tightened around it. Another fell to his knees, sobbing uncontrollably. Sheriff Dalton drew his revolver and fired into the well. The gunshot exploded across the fields. The bullet hit the water and vanished without a ripple. Samuel's eyes shifted toward the sheriff. For the first time, he blinked. Dalton's hand began shaking violently. The revolver slipped from his fingers. Behind Samuel, the water darkened further, and the children began rising higher, not climbing, not swimming, just lifting upward as though the well itself rejected gravity. Thomas felt a sudden pressure in his ears. Then he heard it. The sound of stone grinding. Slow, heavy. The old wooden cover of the well, burned decades ago, was reforming. Charred planks emerging from the air itself, nails pushing into place, rebuilding what had once sealed the darkness. Only this time, it was forming above them, not over the well, but over the entire plantation yard. The sky dimmed. Wooden beams stretched across the air like a lid descending over a box. Workers screamed and tried to run beyond the property line, but each time they reached the edge of the field, they appeared again near the well. Trapped, Thomas finally understood. This isn't punishment, he whispered. Samuel's eyes locked onto his. No, the voice answered. It's balance. The wooden structure above finished forming. A massive lid covering the sky. The light disappeared. The last thing Thomas saw was the well overflowing upward, water pouring into the darkness above, carrying every silent face with it. And then, the plantation was sealed. From the inside, no one knows exactly what happened inside the plantation that night, because when morning came, the sky was clear, the fields were silent, and the plantation was empty. Every worker, Sheriff Dalton, Thomas, gone. Not a single body was ever found. The well stood in the center of the yard, calm and ordinary. Its stone walls dry. No sign of rising water, no broken windows, no shattered glass, just silence. Authorities from the nearest town investigated for weeks. They found abandoned tools, half-eaten food inside the house, Dalton's revolver lying in the dirt, but no footprints leaving the property, and no footprints entering. The official report called it mass hysteria. Some said they fled during the night. Others claimed a gas leak, but the locals knew better. Because sometimes, on windless evenings, the well still makes a sound, a single knock. Slow, deliberate. Years passed. The plantation was eventually abandoned and swallowed by overgrowth. Trees twisted around the house. Vines covered the broken porch. But the well never collapsed. It never dried. And no one dared to seal it again. 20 years later, a group of teenagers entered the property on a dare. They filmed everything, laughing, mocking the old stories. One of them leaned over the well and shouted into it. "Anyone down there?" They waited. Nothing. They laughed. Then, a soft knock echoed upward. The camera shook. One boy stepped back. Another leaned closer. The water inside looked normal. Still, black, until a small ripple formed, then another. And from the dark surface, a reflection appeared, not of the teenagers, but of the plantation yard, at night, lit by a dim, unnatural glow. And standing around the well were figures, dozens of them, looking up, watching, waiting. The video ended there. The footage was found on the ground days later. The teenagers were never seen again. Today, the land remains unowned. Maps still mark it. But no one builds there, because the well does not take in anger. It does not take in fear. It takes in balance, and when it is given enough, it returns everything. All of it. Some say if you stand near it long enough, you can hear children whispering, not asking for help, not begging, just counting, as if waiting for the number to be complete. The black water in the well began to swirl violently, carrying the pale hands of the children upward, twisting as though animated by an unseen force. The plantation yard seemed to shiver under the weight of some unseen pressure. Thomas clutched his wife's arm, her eyes wide with fear. As the fog thickened and a low hum vibrated through the air, suddenly the sky above the yard darkened unnaturally. A massive wooden structure began to form, descending from the clouds like a lid closing over the plantation. Splintered beams stretched downward, creaking as though the wind itself could not bear the weight. Every living thing froze, even the animals hidden in the overgrown fields. The children's silhouettes rose higher, their black eyes fixed on the couple. Their tiny, ghostly fingers pointed toward the yard, then back to the well, signaling an invisible command. Objects from the yard, tools, crates, and fallen branches began to levitate and orbit around the descending structure. The fog swirled faster, forming spirals that seemed to lift off the ground. Thomas tried to pull his wife away, but the pull from the well was irresistible, cold air gripping their skin like ice. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening now. Balance must be restored. Balance must be restored. One of the children's faces surfaced fully. A pale boy with hollow black eyes, and he smiled. It was not innocent. It was a knowing, chilling smile, a promise of reckoning. The wooden lid continued to descend, stretching across the yard, covering every tree, every overgrown fence, every shadowed corner of the plantation. Thomas realized then that the well's reach was no longer confined. It extended outward, pulling everything into its dark domain. Even the sheriff's voice, shouting orders, was drowned out by the thick, vibrating hum. Thomas clutched his wife tighter, realizing that the plantation would never be the same. The well was not just a container of the past, it was a force correcting centuries of forgotten horrors, and nothing living would escape its judgment tonight. The massive wooden lid finally settled, enclosing the plantation yard in a shadowy dome. The black water inside the well remained eerily still, reflecting the ghostly figures that had emerged. Thomas and his wife crouched together, holding hands, sweat dripping despite the cold mist enveloping them. Around them, the children's faces floated just beneath the water surface, each one silently counting. Their whispers resonated in the air, forming a haunting melody that seeped into the couple's bones. Every tree, every stone, and every vine in the yard seemed alive, moving subtly, stretching, twisting, reacting to the well's will. Tools, crates, and fragments of old plantation furniture hovered, then slowly returned to the ground as if acknowledging the new order. The couple noticed that no footstep left a mark, no breath disturbed the fog. Time itself felt altered. The plantation existed in a bubble, trapped between reality and something else. The children's hands occasionally surfaced, touching objects lightly before retracting, as if inspecting the world they were about to reclaim. Thomas whispered to his wife, "We can't fight this. We can't leave. Nothing leaves this place anymore." And then, as suddenly as it began, silence fell. The fog thinned, just enough to reveal the plantation, fully enclosed beneath the wooden dome. The well, black and calm, had completed its cycle. Balance had been restored on its own terms. The couple understood. This place would remain a prison and a warning, a site where the forgotten past could not be disturbed again. Morning came, but it brought no sunlight. The plantation yard was still enclosed beneath the heavy wooden dome, shadows stretching unnaturally across the overgrown fields. Thomas and his wife remained close, exhausted, their minds trying to process the horror they had witnessed. The well stood in the center, deceptively calm. Its black water reflected nothing but the darkened sky above. No movement, no ripple, yet the couple could feel the faint heartbeat of something ancient. Watching, waiting. The ghostly children had vanished from sight, yet their presence lingered like a weight pressing on the air. Over the next hours, every sound seemed magnified. The creak of branches, the rustle of leaves, even distant animal cries carried a strange echo, as if the land itself remembered the events. Tools lay scattered, yet untouched by chaos. Objects appeared perfectly aligned, almost deliberate. Thomas whispered to his wife, "It's not over. It never will be over." Her hand trembled in his, and the fog seemed to respond, curling around them like fingers. The couple understood that the plantation existed now as a threshold, a thin veil between the living and the restless, a domain where the past could never be forgotten. Even the sheriff, once so steadfast, had vanished without a trace. No bodies, no footprints, only questions and the persistent feeling that the land itself had judged and taken what it wanted. The plantation was alive, aware, and eternal. Years later, the abandoned plantation remained overgrown and silent. The well, black and calm, stood at the center of the yard like a sentinel. Trees twisted unnaturally, and the fog rolled in slowly, carrying with it faint whispers that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Locals avoided the property entirely, claiming that strange sounds could be heard at night. Children counting, faint wooden knocks and soft, melodic whistles carried by the wind. Sometimes those brave enough to approach would see reflections in the water, shadowy faces staring back, black eyes unblinking, waiting. The story of Thomas and his wife became legend. Some said they vanished inside the plantation forever, trapped with the well's eternal guardians. Others claimed that on quiet nights, the couple could be glimpsed near the oak tree, silently watching over the land, witnesses to the unfinished reckoning. Maps still mark the location, but no one dares trespass. The well does not take anger or fear, it takes imbalance. And when it has enough, it returns everything. Slowly, deliberately, like a clock counting toward a number only it knows. Those who listen closely swear they can hear the whispers, counting one by one. And sometimes a faint echo of a child's voice. "Father, it is complete."